Positive way, Alex. Your accent is hysterical. You sound exactly like I should have expected you to sound.
I caught up with a few of my SMU mates during the lockdown and quarantine or whatever, and they all said the same thing.
Yeah. Do people in Australia make fun of you for having an American accent?
I'm destined to be ridiculed my entire life, I think.
Yeah.
When it comes to my accent.
Hello, FC Dallas Curious fans. Welcome to episode 64 of Third Degree, the podcast. I'm Buzz Carrick. I'm flying solo tonight. I do have a special guest with me, however. I think a former FC Dallas and former SMU player. We'll get to the rest of his career in a minute, but I think everyone's going to love to hear his story because I find it absolutely fascinating. But before we do that, let me remind everybody that if you enjoy this podcast or anything we do online or on Twitter, on social media, all the reporting and covering of FC Dallas and pro soccer, you can support us at patreon.com/third degree. All right, let's get on right into the podcast. And today's special guest, as I said, is a former SMU and FC Dallas player, the one and only Alex Smith. Alex Smith, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Buzz. I really appreciate you having me, man.
Well, now there's probably, and let's be fair, Alex, there's probably some fans at home who might be scratching their head to wonder who Alex Smith is. And we will talk about all that and what he has to do with FC Dallas and SMU. But let's start at the very, very beginning, Alex. You were born in Windsor, England in 1985. But you came to the United States at age of 1. So just a baby. But what brought your family and you to the United States?
Well, at the time, my father was working for British Petroleum, for BP, and he was working for his uncle, who was stationed in Oregon. So we moved over to Oregon for 3-4 years, and then eventually moved down to Houston when I was about 4, I think, for him to start his own company, and that's where I grew up, and that's where I was raised, and until the age of about 18 when I went off to college. Now,
your parents still live in the Houston area, I believe. Is that correct?
Yep, they still there. They've since got a place in England as well. But yeah, they spend most of the time either in Texas or England or visiting me out here in Australia.
Well, now you've spoiled it a little bit that you have lived in Australia for a while, but you're from England. That's okay. You're from England and you live in the United States. I know you have U.S. citizenship. What country do you consider yourself to be from, if people ask you?
That's a great question, and I think it sometimes it gets a different answer
depending on who asked. Yeah,
depending on who asked and what I'm going to benefit from which answer I give. But no, I still have my 3 passports from all 3 different countries. So I'd like to say I've taken something from everywhere I've been and lived, and I feel a strong pull to England. I don't know why. I was only there for about a year, but call it something bringing me back. I don't know what it is, but home at the moment, and probably for the majority of my life will be over here in Australia.
Now I'm going to ask you the question that I asked pretty much everybody that comes on this podcast, and that is, how and when did you fall in love with the game of soccer? Football, if you prefer that term.
Football, yeah, which is another interesting conversation.
Yeah.
When did I fall in love with the game of soccer? I probably fell in love at a very young age. My earliest memories of soccer was picking the ball up close to our goal, dribbling through 4 or 5 players and scoring at the other end. And I think that for me was the joy. That was football at its purest, which gets ruined a bit later in life. Starting when you're about 10 and you're wanted by a team to play up when you're in the under 12 division or whatever it was, and some rule says that you can't because they don't allow kids to play up in age. which is about when it started, about when the joy went out of it for me.
So your youth development happened in the United States. You talked about playing youth soccer, so I'm sure you're well aware of how the youth system works here. Did you play for a big name youth club or ODP or any kind of high level development soccer?
We had a team called Bear Creek United in Houston, which has since become Texas United, I think. One of my old friends is now the technical director there. But no, we had a very good team. It was mixed with a lot of different nationalities and a lot of different personalities. Arturo Alvarez played on that team with me.
Oh wow, small world.
So we grew up together, and we still talk to this day. Every couple of weeks. So we had quite a good solid team. Stewie Holden played in our league as well. He played on another team. So the quality that came from our sort of area in our age group was quite high. I made state ODP teams, but never anything higher than that. Never regional or national. So,
well, there's certainly nothing wrong with making a state ODP team, but let's move straight on to college. And you started out in college playing soccer at Centenary College in Louisiana. You scored 6 goals and 6 assists in 17 games. But how did you get to Centenary from Houston, and what is that program like?
I could probably do a whole podcast just on that little tiny school. So I wasn't. Again, I only made. I say only, but I only made state ODP teams. I wasn't a high level recruit, I guess you could say. I was a bit of a late developer, I think, as well. I grew 6 inches my sophomore year in high school or something.
Wow.
And so I was still a bit gangly and kind of uncoordinated, and it took a while to catch up. So, I had a few recruitment letters, but nothing massive. And I got one from Centenary saying they were offering a full scholarship, and it seemed like the right decision at the time. It was a tiny school. I think the smallest Division I NCAA school in the country. I think we had 1,000 students.
Good grief.
So you can look at it. I guess you can look at it two ways. It was tiny, but it was a really close knit school, and everyone knew each other, and everyone went to every single sporting game that there was, because it was all there was to do really in Shreveport. So it was definitely an interesting time, and a good buffering period between my time, leaving home and then being in the real world, I guess.
Now, this was in 2003 when I mentioned you had 6 and 6. You transferred to SMU though. So how did that transfer come about?
We played SMU in a preseason friendly, I think it was, and this would have been 2005, and they were ranked quite high in the national polls, and I think we went up 1-0. I scored a goal from 35 meters out or whatever it was, and we ended up losing 6-1. And after the game, Shellis came up to me and said, "Look, if you're not happy at the end of the year, then give us make contact or whatever, however he said it. I can't really remember, but which is kind of how those things work, I guess. I don't think it's entirely above board, but I don't know how else transfers can happen. So that was kind of how it happened.
Now you score 13 goals in 19 games at SMU in your first season, which is a sophomore, and you make Missouri Valley first team. How was playing for Shellis? Did you enjoy that experience? He's a very love-hate kind of coach. A lot of guys hate playing for him. A lot of guys love playing for him.
I enjoyed it. For me, he was, he was very old school. He was very, if you produce on the pitch, then it doesn't really matter what's going on, how you train, all that sort of stuff. He gave his players a lot of freedom, tactically, and the sort of the modern coach. I don't know if that was his strongest point, but you can't argue with a guy that got the kind of results that he did. He was lucky in the fact that SMU could recruit the best players, and even off the wall transfers from Centenary College came in and did really well. So he was everyone has their strengths and everyone has their weaknesses, So, but in terms of the season and trainings and it was a great program. It was a great school. It was, the facilities were unbelievable. So, I thoroughly enjoyed my solitary year there.
Well, we must say this is where it starts to get interesting. And if you guys don't know Alex's story, this is where the left turn starts to happen, because after that season, you go on trial to, and hopefully this is correct, Shrewsbury Town and Walsall in England. But before we get into the consequences of that, how did those trials, and if they are the correct trials, how did they come to pass, and what was that process like?
Well, basically, the plan was always to go to England that summer and keep, because as in between seasons is a 4-month summer break or whatever it is. So anywhere else in the world, a 19, 20-year-old professional or someone that wants to be a professional footballer, they're not taking a 3-month break. So
right.
It was more of a go over there, just train, keep in shape with some teams. But the reason, I guess, the reason it all came about was really due to scholarship money. When I came initially as a transfer, I think I had a small scholarship to SMU, which, as you know, is quite an expensive school.
Indeed.
And I guess the communication always was that, you come here for a year, you have a good year, and then we'll look at it, at the end of the year, and hopefully we can get you on a full scholarship. And that talk went on throughout the year as I was doing quite well. I don't think I could have done any more, led the team in scoring, and, was basically a surprise package, and did all I could on the football pitch.
13 and 19 games is amazing.
And I don't want to, it's not blowing your own horn or anything, but it's, those were the conversations that we had with the program. So, and it kind of came to my attention. I think I had a meeting with Shellis just after the season, and the communication was that it might not be possible to get you any more money. Which hurt a little bit, and it didn't really sit well with me. So that's when I really made a decision to go to England, and I guess give it a shot's the wrong word, because I always had SMU in the back of my mind. I never went over there 100% determined to leave SMU. I always did everything I could when I went over there to keep my amateur status, or whatever you want to call it. When I went to initially Shrewsbury, and then on to Walsall.
So most Americans probably don't know what the process of a trial is like in those situations. How are they like when you get over there? How does it work?
Well, you have to know somebody, and I think I had a connection through one of the local clubs in Houston. A guy we knew growing up. He'd come over from England. He had a couple of connections over there, and basically they just they set you up. You go to training. Sometimes it only takes an hour for the coach to say, what, you're not going to fit in here. That's never happened to me, but I've seen it happen. And then basically just goes from there. If the coach is interested, then you stay on for a bit, maybe play in a game or two, and then a contract normally develops close after that.
So to get to the heart of the matter here, when you come back to SMU for the next season, the NCAA rules you ineligible to play college soccer ever again, if I understand this correctly, and if I remember correctly. My memory says something about a gate being charged on one of your tryout sort of games or something like that. What was it that the NCAA objected to in terms of your trials?
Yeah,
do you remember?
Oh yeah. You don't forget something like that.
All
right. So I went initially to Shrewsbury Town. I went to Shrewsbury Town for a day.
Yeah.
because I had Walsall set up. It was Shrewsbury Town was more like a late add-on thing that just sort of kind of happened when I got over there. I had a really good training session. Joe Hart was playing for Shrewsbury at the time, and I had a really good session, and basically was offered a contract after the session
at Shrewsbury.
Yeah, and I hadn't obviously I just trained, but Walsall in the time was in the Championship, or I think it was Division 1 at the time. So I decided to honour my commitment and go to Walsall, and I ended up staying there for 2 or 3 months. I think it was maybe 2 months. 2 months, I think it was. And I was sort of right on the cusp of yes, maybe no. The problem with me was I was already 20 at the time, and the reasoning I got was we've got someone who's basically the same, who's 17, 18. So it didn't work out, and while I was there, I played in a couple of preseason games with them.
Mm-hmm.
Which was actually one of my greatest memories. It was Paul Merson was the player manager there at the time, and to share the pitch with him and was actually incredible. But when I was there, I took care of all my accommodation, all my meals. They didn't pay for anything. Rented a car, drove to and from training, all that sort of stuff. And it didn't work out, which I wasn't too disappointed with, because I didn't go over there with the 100% intention of making it or bust. So as soon as I got back to Dallas, I had a meeting with Shellis and someone else, and I just let them know that this is what I had done and where I'd been. More as just a catch up as to what I'd been doing over the summer, and not thinking anything of it. And then they said, "Oh, well, we've got to report this to the NCAA or something." And I was, well, what for? I took care of I covered all my expenses, blah 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 blah. And they said, "No, but it's because people paid to watch these games," which is absolutely absurd. And so then we went through the process, and then we had this big hearing where I had to give a deposition and all this. Like it was pretty full on and pretty unnecessary, if you ask me. But we went through the process, and I was very sincere in the fact of what I was doing and why I did it, and told them everything I knew basically. And they came, and we also, the funny thing was, we also had a precedent. I think it was a year earlier. There was a guy from Indiana. I forget his name. Jed is coming to mind for some reason. Anyway, he'd basically done the exact same thing, and he had got a 6-game suspension from the NCAA for the next year. So I was thinking, worst case scenario, this is what's going to happen. Maybe have to sit out a few games, and
right.
Yeah, at this point, I'm only I've still got my junior and senior year left. I'd already spoken to FC Dallas and Kansas City and a couple other MLS clubs about Generation Adidas and the possibility of that happening. So I wasn't anywhere near expecting what they came back with, which was, like you said, I was forbidden from participating in any more NCAA activities for life.
Yeah. Well, and also because you're NCAA ineligible, you're not eligible for the MLS Super Draft either. So you have to basically sit out for all of 2005 waiting for something with 2006.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not only was it your life's turned upside down with university, then you think, okay, well, I'll go into the draft and, at least, something good comes out of this. And then the MLS comes back with, nope, you're not actually a college player, so you're not eligible for the draft. And that was, at the time, like I said, I was speaking to 2 or 3 MLS clubs. So the Generation Adidas thing, that's a 3-year contract, and
right,
it's kind of a big, it's a big deal, and a great way for a young player to start his career. And that was where my mind was at the time. So to have that kind of taken away as well was just completely completely demoralizing.
Yeah, I can only imagine what's going through your mind at that point.
Yeah. This is where my love-hate relationship with football really sort of started to sway towards the hate side. It's not a game anymore. It's not, you're not playing sport. You're playing with, bureaucracy and rules and just, just silly stuff. When at the end of the day, it's just a game, and that's all we're there to do is play on the pitch and make people happy. So, from there, it just it went downhill for the next couple of years.
Well, in 2006, you signed as a discovery signing with FC Dallas. How did that come about with them specifically? I know you had at least some interest from Kansas City. Why FC Dallas, and was there a specific reason that they were interested in you? I mean, not a reason. It was like, were they the ones that said, here's an offer, and that was it? Or was it simply a case of they were the team in town?
Oh no! This is where the story gets even more interesting.
I figured it would.
So because I couldn't go into the draft, Kansas City were interested and Dallas were interested. So I had to be signed as a, like you said, what they call a discovery.
Discovery, yeah.
Which is a ludicrous term as well. but I will say the MLS has come a long way since I left.
Yeah.
And so Kansas City and Dallas both put in to sign me. Now the rights to sign someone, to sign a discovery player, if there's two teams that put in, the right to sign someone goes to the team who finished lower in the league the previous season.
Correct.
So that meant Kansas City.
Okay.
Keep in mind, like my girlfriend was in Dallas. I was still going to SMU, so I was wanted to finish my degree. Everything was. I was still in Dallas. I was living in Dallas. So basically, Kansas City had my rights. So I ended up going to Kansas City for 2 months. We went to Florida as well. This was preseason, by the way, as well. And FC Dallas said right off the bat, we've got a half decent contract for you, but we can't sign you because Kansas City has your rights. So basically, at this point, I'm all over the place mentally. I'm a young kid. I don't know anything about professional football really just yet. So I thought to myself, I'll go to Kansas City and just walk around and play bad and on purpose, and they'll say, oh, okay, well, obviously he's not interested, and whatever. So that ended up taking better part of a month and a half, 2 months. At which point I had a meeting with the manager. I can't remember his name, but he was quite a nice guy and quite down to earth, and we had a good open, honest conversation. And he said, "Okay, well, you clearly don't want to be here, so we'll try and work something out with Dallas." And I think they traded a draft pick or something for the rights. And so finally got my wish, got back to Dallas, at which point they told me the only contract that was left, because I don't know if they still do it that way, but they have certain categories of contracts that are worth a certain amount of money.
Supplemental roster. Yeah.
Yeah. So, at that point, the only contract that was left was a $12,000 a year, 1 year deal.
Yeah, a lot of MLS fans don't know that even in the mid 2000s, the bottom end of a roster, the supplemental roster, was literally paying, as you just said, $12,000 a season.
Yeah, I mean, so at this stage, after this was about a year after I'd played my last game for SMU, I think.
I do remember you. Did you not train some and scrimmage some with Dallas though? In the meantime,
yeah, I was training. They were still wearing the burn uniforms at that point, I think. Or I don't know if there was, or maybe it was just the old logo, or the old like Jeff Cassar was there, and all those guys. Eddie Johnson was there, and so I did a lot of training with him, and that was why there was so much interest, because I've been training with him for months. Um, and the talk was, a good contract, not big money for but for a starting salary, you're talking 40, 50, 60 grand, something like that.
Yeah, full senior roster.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then, you know, after all this, I'd gone from, Generation Adidas, talk and fairly certain that was going to happen to a $12,000 contract, $500 a fortnight. It was just completely demoralizing. I didn't know how to handle it, and it sort of went downhill even more from there.
I'm sure you feel like that affected your play during that one season.
Oh, absolutely. I was that. It took me the better part of 2 or 3 years to get over everything that had happened, let alone 6 months, to play and really push for a starting spot. I just wasn't. I wasn't mature enough to be able to handle it. I wasn't equipped with the tools, and to be honest, there was no one from the club that even thought about my situation, or people tried to help. Retrospectively, you look at it, and there were people trying to help, but it just wasn't a situation that was ever going to work out for me. Based on what had happened.
Well, before we get to what you did next, how was playing for Colin Clark? Did you enjoy playing for him? And I know that you were essentially playing in reserve games and some scrimmages. Was it at all a positive experience playing for him and being in that situation?
Not really. I was quite lucky because I had a couple of friends on the team. I had Arturo, I had Ramon, and I had Chris Bandy, who's obviously from Houston as well. I'd known him since growing up. Played with his brother as well.
Oh, was Ramon was at SMU with you?
Well, Ramon was in and around SMU, so I'd known him.
Oh, I see.
I'd known him before, so we he was friends with a lot of the guys that
played with.
Yeah. So, we all kind of hung out, and it was a good group of young guys. We had Dax as well. Dax was a quality player, and
sure.
Alex Yee and people like that. We had quite a good young Pitch Colin, and mixed with quite a good sort of senior pros as well. So the group itself was actually really good group. But I didn't have much to do with Colin. I was, again, I did have the feeling that I was sort of just pushed to the side and not really worried about too much. A lot of that had to do with my attitude and the way I went about things. But if I'm a coach, a year before, I'm scoring goals left, right, and center, and he's watching me play, and it was all positive. And to see a change, the change in my demeanor and attitude would have been so obvious that I don't know how anyone couldn't have seen it. But it is what it is. I think Colin actually set me up with an agent who you have to have an agent to do your contract. And he set me up with one of his, I think it was a friend of his, not that he had to do much anyway. But that was really the only dealings I had with Colin.
Well, after the one season of 2006, you retired from pro soccer. Now, Wikipedia says you messed around with DFW Toros a little bit in town, but basically you were done with pro soccer at that point. Do you remember a moment when you said at this stage, "That's it, I'm out. I just can't do this"?
It would have been my exit meeting with FC Dallas. I again, and this comes down to how how ill-equipped and how immature I was, and just completely not knowing the situation, what was happening, not being aware of what professional soccer was like or anything like that. I went into my exit meeting, thinking we'll talk about next year and whatever, and I think I had it with Steve Morrow, and it was no, we're not going to be re-signing you next year, and thanks for your time, and that was it. Sort of walked out of the meeting at Frisco Park and just went, you know what, this isn't for me. This is, it's become it's become something that isn't even close to football. You know, I had that much negative energy surrounding football and you know, professional clubs, whatever you want to call it. I felt like I had been, you know, chucked in a washing machine and just put on a high speed, you know, turn for a year. So at that point, I just said, you know what, I'm done with it for now. It was never really a clear retirement type thing. It was more, you know, I need to take as much time off as possible, because I knew I would always play football. But in terms of professionally again, I wasn't even thinking about it.
Well, within a period of time, I don't know exactly how many, a year, 2 years, 3 years, at some point you decide to move to Australia, which we all can tell from your accent. So what led you to choose Australia? And can you fill us in a little bit about the process of, okay, I'm going to go to Australia. Let's move. How do you get there? You know, what takes you across the world, basically?
Well, keep in mind that after I'd finished with FC Dallas, I still had another year and a half or 2 years at school. I wanted to, you know, I'd been there that long. I wanted to finish my degree, because when you're playing professional football, you can't go to school full time.
Right.
So I'd had to take, you know, less classes or less credits, whatever you want to call it. So it ended up taking me 5 years to get my degree, which I've never used once in my entire life, by the way.
What's your degree in?
My Bachelor of History.
All right. Yeah, that's useless.
Yeah. So it was literally the only thing I could sit through in school. So it was the only thing that interests me. So that's why I did that. But anyway, that's another story. Hopefully my parents don't listen to
yeah.
I'm sure they will, but they know that as well. So that's all good. So then, yeah, I basically wanted to finish my my degree. During that time, I came out here on holiday with my ex-girlfriend, and absolutely just loved the place. And you know, thought, I don't know if I thought at the time, but I was thinking I'll definitely be back here, and in what capacity I don't know. And then finished my degree. Sort of floundered around for a few months that summer, and then one day just thought, you know what, I had some savings, and just thought, you know what, I'm gonna move to Australia, and did some research on the visas, and Australia has it's nowhere near as crazy as, well, it wasn't back then. You could go on a work and holiday, so it was a year visa. You had to come over here and you had to work for 6 months, and then you could have a holiday for 6 months, basically. And I picked Cairns, in far north Queensland. It's a nice tropical town, Great Barrier Reef, and you know, it was just a really laid back sort of kind of Key West type town. And I just packed up my things and moved on out.
And what kind of job did you get when you got down to Australia?
Oh, I worked in bars. I worked for a company called Caltex, which is obviously an oil company. I worked in admin stuff, and yeah, just pretty much did anything I could to live and you know, just enjoy life, really. It'd been that long since I'd actually got to, you know, enjoy life and not worry about, you know, school or football or anything else, and just, you know, just sort of live.
Now, at some point between moving there and what I eventually found is that you start playing soccer for a team called Fraser Park FC, which is basically, let's call it a semi-pro team. It's in the New South Wales Super League, which is, I guess, is equivalent to the third tier. But there's no information I can find for between when you get there and how you get to Fraser Park. How did you get back into soccer to play at least at this semi-pro level?
So basically, Cairns has a really big, they call it the Esplanade. It's this really sort of public area down by the water, where everyone goes on a hot day to just, you know, sit out and, you know, have a few beers or whatever it is, and inevitably a football starts bouncing around, and I got just juggling the ball with some of these guys. Most of them were Islander, sort of Pacific Islander guys, and I don't know. I got to chatting with them, and they introduced me to another guy who worked for Qantas, which is obviously the airline over here as well. And we became pretty good friends over the next couple of months. He introduced me to one of his co-workers, who is now my wife.
Congratulations!
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, we're not actually married. I just call her my wife.
Oh, no, goodness!
Make it easier.
Yeah.
We've been together 11 years. We got 2 kids, so I think things are a little bit more relaxed over here.
Yeah, that's your wife.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And anyway, so after we met, she was moving to Sydney in about 3 months or 4 months after we met. So obviously the feelings were strong enough for me to move to Sydney. And one of the guys from Cairns, he knew someone at a club, Fraser Park, and got in contact. I went down for a session, and then I thought, this is all right. It's not too, there's not too much pressure. There's not too much expectation. I can come and make, I think it was $400 or $500 a week or something, to play. And the funny thing was, I was making as much money as I was making at FC Dallas, or
Right.
even more.
Yeah.
So it was fun. That was the only reason I got back into it, was to see if I could, find that joy again, and just play the game for what it is, and inevitably when you do that, you play really well, and you score a lot of goals, and things start to happen.
Well, I dare say you found your joy, because in 2010, which I believe is the first season you're back at this level, you score 11 goals in 20 games for Fraser Park, and you're named the New South Wales Super League Player of the Year, which is a pretty remarkable achievement, I must say. So 2011, you move up a division, I believe, to the New South Wales Premier League, and a team called Sydney Olympic. And that's essentially the second tier below the A-League, which is the MLS equivalent in Australia, if I'm correct. So how did you get from Fraser to Sydney? Obviously, they're both in Sydney, of course.
Yeah, I mean, Sydney's full of teams. There'd be sort of 8 to 10 second tier teams in Sydney. One of the coaches who actually owned a cafe really close to where we lived. He was coach at Sydney Olympic, and we just chatting one day, and he said, why don't you come play for us? And that was how it worked. So obviously, a bit more money, and a bit more, I guess it gets a bit more serious at that stage. But again, it was still, at this point, I wasn't thinking about football as a career or anything like that. I was just really focused on having fun and just trying to enjoy it. The other thing as well was I'm a foreigner here, obviously, and A-League has quite strict rules when it comes to foreigners. There's only 5 allowed on each team, and there's only 10 teams. So at this stage, I thought the chances of that happening were quite slim. So I might as well enjoy myself, and just see where it led, I guess.
Well, in 2011, this is my favorite part of the story. According to the information I found, in your debut game, you score a hat trick with Sydney Olympic, which is amazing. Well done. And you end up scoring 10 goals in 14 games with them. I can't tell if that's the whole season or not, but at some point, maybe even as early as when you're playing with Fraser Park, you had a trial with Gold Coast United, which is an A-League team. And as you're tearing it up with Sydney Olympic, they eventually sign you for the 2011-2012 A-League season, according to the information I have, which is the top tier in Australia. That's the MLS equivalent. So is that correct? Did you sign with Gold Coast United, and how did that all come together?
Oh, man. So
I know. I told people this is a good story, that we have to get in all the details, right?
No. It's look, I enjoy telling it, because if you tried to make it up, you probably couldn't.
I know.
So yeah, I had been up to Gold Coast when I was playing with Fraser Park, more as a I made a friend in Sydney, and he was an agent, and at that stage it was more just I'll go see what it's like, and I get to go, and they'll pay for everything, and I'll see what it's like. And then started quite well with Sydney Olympic. I think I scored 8 goals in the first 6 games, and at which stage Gold Coast came in. We had a meeting, and I signed a pre-contract for, I think it was about a month later. I had to be up there, so which was for the minimum wage, which was still half decent, 50-60K, I think it was, which is
that
5
is
times
good.
more than I was making in the MLS.
Right.
Which I ended up comparing everything I ever did to that first contract I signed at FC Dallas.
I would imagine.
So
yeah.
Anyway, so I left Sydney Olympic. We did really well. We were top of the league for the pretty much the whole season. I left with about 4 or 5 games to go, I think, maybe more than that. I can't remember.
Okay.
Moved everything up to the Gold Coast. Signed a 12-month lease for an apartment. My girlfriend moved up. She was working out of Sydney, but commuting from the Gold Coast. Basically moved up my entire life. Had a preseason with them. I got injured for about a month of that. Now, Gold Coast United was owned by a guy named Clive Palmer, who was basically a mining magnate and famous for meddling in his team's affairs, or whatever, however you want to put it. So anyway, one day Clive tells our coach Miran, who I'm still friends with to this day, that he wants to bring in a Dutch foreign striker by the name of Massio Ritkers, who was more of a typical number 9 type player. At which point Miran comes to me. So we played a couple of preseason games. The A-League hadn't started yet. And he comes to me and he says, "Look, Clive wants to sign this player. We need you a foreign spot." Because obviously there's only 5 foreigners, and they chose me as the one to get rid of. So basically, we'll be paying you out your entire contract, and that's it. So immediately, I went home and told my girlfriend, and all those feelings of FC Dallas and SMU and all that stuff that happened to me back in the States just immediately came back, and it was very, very difficult to be able to deal with. I still hadn't played a professional game. You finally start thinking, okay, this is it, and you finally start coming around to the idea, okay, I can get back into professional sport, and then it's all just taken away because this guy who knows nothing about football wants to bring someone in.
Well, at that point, your option essentially is to go back and you rejoin Sydney Olympic, essentially, and you help them win the league. And you score, is it the opening goal in the grand final against Sydney United? So there's a positivity to the end of that story. But how do you go from that dark moment to try and get it going again with Sydney and try and find that joy that you were just talking about 5 minutes ago?
Yeah. I mean, that's the $1 million question. That's the trick. That's what I'm looking to try and do now as a coach is try and help people find their joy. It's not easy, but my time off the game, those 2 or 3 years, however long I had, really kind of just made me realize that it just there's much more important things, and if stuff happens, it just happens, and it's the way you deal with it, not that matters, not what actually happened. So, I'm not going to say I didn't, have a few nights out on the drink and feel really bad for myself and all that sort of stuff. But I found myself much more able to deal with a setback than I obviously did, earlier in my life. And so, yeah, flew. I think I flew in and flew out for the games at Sydney Olympic. For the next, I think we had one more game in the season, and then we had the semi-final and the grand final, which we won, which was amazing. And then the next morning, literally, so we had the grand final I think it was on the Sunday, and the Monday morning, 6 a.m. I flew to Wellington.
Right, that's the next stage of the story is that you go to Wellington Phoenix, which is a New Zealand club. For those listening that don't know, that if I understand it correctly, they play in the Australian A League as well. So you went over there for, was it a trial or did you already have something lined up when you went over to Wellington?
No, it was a trial. It was like a 2 or 3 day trial or something. They had one of their players just before the season. So the season's literally about to start. I think the next weekend, which I should have been playing with Gold Coast.
Right.
And I think the previous week one of their players had broken his arm trying to do a bicycle kick at training or something. And he would actually become my roommate, so quite funny. But so yeah, I flew out after the game, and yeah, the Wellington Phoenix, they play in the A League. It's quite an interesting situation. They, all of our anyway, I guess I'll get into that later. And for those of you that don't know about New Zealand, Wellington specifically, it's the windiest city in the world. Chicago is second, I think. So Wellington has the shortest runway in the entire world because of the wind. They know that the wind's going to slow the planes down. So anyway, it's renowned for its wind. And the first day I landed, it was blowing about 70 miles an hour. It was sleeting. It was just horrible. Had a training session. Ended up having a really good training session and was offered an 8-week injury replacement contract at the end of that session for the guy who broke his arm. So I don't know how they do it in the MLS, but basically an injury replacement is someone gets injured, you can sign someone to replace them, and the wages are taken care of by insurance or FFA, which is the governing body here.
Yeah, there's something similar in MLS. I think it has a 6-week length, but they do have that same sort of mechanism. But you have to fall below a certain number of roster people. But that doesn't matter for the purposes of this podcast. But eventually, obviously, things go well enough because they give you a longer contract, and you end up playing there for a pretty good run. Was there a point at which, obviously, in that first 8-week deal, they were like, "Fantastic, kid! Here's a new longer deal, and we want to keep you around"?
Oh no. Not with my story. So that season, I signed 5 contracts that season.
Wow.
Every 8 weeks. Luckily there was I say luckily, but there was another guy who had done his ACL, so he was out for the season. So they had another player that they could transfer my replacement to, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah, I signed 5 injury replacement contracts that season. And it wasn't till the very end of the season that I signed a new full 1-year deal for the next season. But I had signed there as a striker, as the injury replacement for the striker who broke his arm.
Right.
First game of the season we played Gold Coast, actually, by the way, which was quite interesting.
I can imagine.
And the best part about that story is that at the end of the season, Gold Coast United folded as a club.
Oh,
and I signed a new deal with Wellington. So, it got there in the end. It just took a little while and a bit of determination. But now to go back to the striker thing, I signed as a striker. And 2 games into the season, we had 2 suspensions and 2 injuries in midfield. So our coach graciously asked, "Does anyone want to put their hand up?" And me wanting to play and impress and be a part of everything, I put my hand up, and I ended up playing 2 seasons at defensive midfield for the club.
Wow. Yeah, I had seen that you had played. The information I'm going by doesn't listen to anything like position. So I had seen you were playing all these games, and I was curious how it had gone. You end up playing a whole season there, and at some point it doesn't go well, and they decide not to keep you. What was the sort of turn in fortunes there? Was it just that everybody got healthy finally?
No. I became at the end of the year, one of our senior players who'd been there a long time. He retired at the age of 30, and they gave me his number. And we played. The first 10 games of that second season, I was starting defensive midfield, and everything was going quite well. I think we were fifth or sixth in the league, and we had new owners take over in between the seasons, and they started to say that they wanted a more attacking style of football. Because we played with 2 6s, and
double pivot.
They started to meddle into our, get in the coach's ear and all this sort of stuff, and it wasn't great. And so then we switched to I guess 1 6 and 2 10s or whatever it was, and I found myself on the outer, and it just kind of went downhill from there. I went to China for a trial, which didn't work out, and then you come back from leaving a club and you're still contracted. You don't really have any chance of re-signing there. So
now Wikipedia says in 2013 you played for somebody called Oakley Cannons. Now I don't know how accurate this is. Was that some sort of loan, or was it something you just joined for a short term?
Yeah, so that's at the end of my A-League contract that second year. Miran Bleiberg, who was the Gold Coast coach, was actually now coaching in the second tier because Gold Coast had folded. So he rang me and said,
ironically, yeah.
I know, yeah. So it's a very small world of football. He rang me, and it was in Oakley's in Melbourne, and I didn't have anything else on the table at the time. So the seasons don't run concurrently here. The second tier in the top league.
I noticed that.
It's a bit silly. Yeah, it's a bit silly how they do it, but it is what it is. There's a lot of issues here, but we won't get into that. And yeah, just played for them for a while. My wife was pregnant with our first child, so Melbourne was a good place to come. She had her parents here, so played there for a little while, and all those thoughts of the professional game. I felt like it didn't really end as well as it could have in Wellington. It was a great city, great club. Just again ruined by things that should never ruin. Basically money and power and non-football people making football decisions.
Don't get me started. All right, so 2014, you join Far North Queensland, which is back in Cairns, which I believe you said was a town you really liked. And over 2 seasons, you scored 33 goals in 41 games. So I guess the joy's back playing soccer, playing striker. So things are going well up in Far North Queensland, it seems.
Yeah, we obviously just had our son, and for me at this point, going in and out of football wasn't an issue. The problem with a lot of professional footballers is that they feel like they have to stay in the game at the highest level. At this stage, the move to Cairns, was never going to really benefit me football wise. It was more a case of we wanted to live in Cairns and we wanted to enjoy our lives a little bit, and raise our son in an area where we knew and we liked. So I basically within 6 months I'd gone from a professional club to training at a primary school. That's where our training pitch was, up in Cairns, which didn't really bother me, but it's crazy how things can turn in the space of 6 months. But no, it was a really successful time for me, I guess, playing wise, and we ended up doing quite well as a club, and they've since folded as well. So I don't know if it's something to do with me.
Alex, yeah, you're the death knell on teams. So a couple of seasons in Far North Queensland. In 2016, to me, this story takes another left turn. Well, at least it does, as far as I'm concerned. And you joined a team in Malaysia called MS Matrix. So how does that deal come about, and how do you take one more time, what seems to me on paper at least, another interesting leap in a career?
So I think I was 29 at the time. I just turned 29, or just turned 30. I can't remember. Anyway, it was towards the end of the year. I'd had another trial with Newcastle Jets, which is in the A League.
Sure.
It was again, it was ruined by something, a coach, and anyway, it doesn't really matter why at this stage. And I'd given myself 2 months. I said I'm going to play for another 2 months. If nothing comes up, I'm done. I'm finished. And about a month later, I get a call from an old friend of mine who I played against in the A League, and he was over there in Malaysia. They had an Aussie coach, and there was 3 Australian players playing for this team. Well, it was still in the preseason, so they were looking for another one. And you can have 4 foreigners in Malaysia, and they asked me if I'd come over for what they call a trial, which in Malaysia means something completely different than it does anywhere else. Everybody has to trial in Malaysia. They don't just sign foreigners. Even if okay, maybe David Beckham or someone like that, but even if you've got a really good pedigree from Europe, you'd still have to fly over there and trial. It's more of a formality than it is anything else. Mm-hmm. So I flew over, flew into KL. This place was in a city called Seremban, which is 45 minutes south of KL. Drove down, and I think I played in a couple of games. Had a couple of training sessions. Met all they're called datos in Malaysia, which are the sort of the high up people, which you need to get approval from. And yeah, the money was more than anything else I'd made in my entire career. So we decided to take the plunge. My son I think he was 3 at the time, so we decided to go over there for a year and give it a shot.
Now, how is that culturally? I assume there's a fish out of water sort of feel to the whole thing. How much English do they speak? Was it a difficult process to play in Malaysia?
In terms of culture and fitting in and lifestyle and all that, it was ridiculously easy. Most people speak English, and you pick up the local bahasa, whatever it is, quite quickly. And KL is Kuala Lumpur is a very international city. It's got everything you could ever imagine. There's IKEAs all over the place, and there's so it was quite easy in that sense. The football side of things, that was probably the toughest. There's so many stories. I could do a podcast just on Malaysia. We had a rain man who, if it was raining during the day, he would come to the pitch and do a dance to get the rain to move away so that we could play the game that night. Players smoking in the change rooms.
So England in the 50s.
Basically, yeah. The grass that we played on, it's that buffalo cow grass, so similar to what you'd have in backyards in Houston or Dallas. It's that real weedy type, and those were our main pitches. But then the stadium itself seats 60,000 people, so it's a massive stadium. And then this pretty horrible pitch. I mean, we had kickoffs because when we had Ramadan, local players don't eat or drink when the sun's up, so they can't eat. They obviously can't put anything in their bodies until the sun goes down, which is 6 or 7 o'clock at night. So you can't then play at 7:30. So some of our kickoffs were at like 10 p.m.
Wow.
And so we'd be getting back to our houses at 1 a.m. From a game.
And if you're talking about 60,000 seater stadiums, these are they full, or these have to be some of the biggest crowds you've ever played in front of?
Yeah, I mean, our club had been had been in the top division, and they had gone down to. So this is second division Malaysia. This isn't even top division, and they had been in the top division, come down to the bottom. So there was a lot of angst amongst the fans about that, but we'd get 20, 25,000. Some of the away trips we played in. They have like an FA Cup there. We went up to a place called Kedah. There was like 50,000 fans there, and
wow.
they're so passionate about football. It was just a great adventure, a great time, and you're making really good money. It's very cheap to live. They give you a house, they give you a car. Thailand is an hour flight. We took short holidays, all over Southeast Asia, and just a really enjoyable time.
I can imagine. Yeah, I mean, living in a foreign country and with a level of affluence must be just, well, especially an exotic sort of theater like that. I can only imagine some of the stories that you would have from that time. In 2017, you shift to another club, and I can't pronounce this one.
just call it JDT.
JDT, Johor Darul Tazim FC2. Is that?
Yep.
Okay, I got it close. JDT. All right. So why the move, and tell me about playing for that club.
So I had quite a good year. My first year in Malaysia, scored a few goals, and so JDT is the biggest club in Southeast Asia. So it rivals some of your clubs in Korea, Japan, and even Australia. It's owned by a prince who is very, very committed to football and growing the game and facilities. I mean, they just built a new stadium for the first team there, and if you get a chance, look it up. It's absolutely amazing. But during my first year, we had played against JDT2. So they've got two teams. They've got JDT and JDT2, which is in the second division, and JDT is in the top division. Pablo Aimar has played for him, and he's brought in a lot of sort of foreign players. Luciano Figueroa, I don't know if you remember him, played for Argentina. He's now their coach. So anyway, I had quite a good game against JDT2, and their coach was a Mexican guy who we made contact with after the season, and he said, "Yes, I'd like you to be one of my foreign players for next season." And again, the money was even better, and it's all US dollars in Malaysia, so there's no tax, which is quite nice as well. And so we went back to Cairns for I think it was a month or two, and then had my second child, and then I came back to Johor, which is on the southern tip of Malaysia, close to Singapore, and sorted out all the stuff, and then my wife and two kids moved over about a month or two later.
And was that a positive experience playing for a team probably more into the spotlight, perhaps?
Yeah, it was a great club. The facilities they would rival most clubs around the world. I obviously haven't been to any MLS clubs lately. I've heard about all the investment that has been put into them, but the facilities at JDT were top class, and it was a great experience. You're playing for a guy who's worshipped. We went to his son's birthday party, so it was basically a prince's birthday party, a royal prince. He brought in trains and 10 horses for people to ride, and all these exotic animals, and this guy standing around with AK-47s. It was an absolutely just unbelievable experience for the whole thing, and it didn't really end well in JDT, but that's football, I guess.
Yeah, 2018, you head back to Sydney Olympic again. Tell me about the end of your time in Malaysia and what took you back to Sydney again.
So actually, We actually went back to that's Brisbane Olympics, so that's a different Olympic.
Oh, that's a typo on my part. My bad.
That's all good. I can see how you could be confused. So yeah, coach and I had the Mexican coach and I had a disagreement, and he I don't know, he thought I said something that I didn't, and it was all just a bit silly, and we had a bit of time off, and I just said to myself, you know what, I think I was 32 by this point. I don't need this, I don't need this anymore. I want to go back to Australia and maybe settle down and finish up playing and get into, start my coaching. I had already gotten a couple of badges by then, but really wanted to focus on my coaching, as the next sort of step. And we moved. I let my wife choose where we were going to move, and she picked a place called the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, which, as the name suggests, is on the coast, full of sunshine, and right on the beach. And we lived there for about 2 years, maybe just a bit more. It's about an hour and a half north of Brisbane, and I started playing. Pretty much realized I didn't want to give up just yet, and started playing in the second tier again with a club called Brisbane Olympic.
Now, did I get that information correct that you again scored a hat trick debut?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Did that again, which was nice. And again, when you're doing it for the right reasons, you generally, or the reasons that are important to you. I mean, I know money is important to some people, so if that's what motivates you, then just I guess if you admit that, and that's why you're playing the game, then it's probably not going to affect you.
Well, according to the interwebs, you had 27 goals in 38 games, leading to a couple of grand finals. I have to say, Alex, that it sure seems like, in your career at least, that the level of joy you're having really comes through on the field. Like you just said, if you're playing for the right reasons, things are going well. Would you think that's a fair assessment?
Oh, absolutely, and I think a lot of that comes down to the coaches that I've had as well, which is a big reason I'm now into coaching. If you think about all those times I had success, I had coaches that were sort of in tune with me and what it what was important to me as a player. And that might not be what's important to everyone else, but the ability to really gauge each one of your players and find out what makes them tick. That's for me is the most important thing about coaching at a senior level.
Now it seems an ACL tear may have ended your playing days, but you've talked already about working on badges ahead of time. Was there a point at which you knew you wanted to coach, or did it just sort of come on you gradually? And on one day you found yourself, oh man, I guess I'm going to be a coach.
Oh, FC Dallas, I knew I wanted to be a coach. I knew the way that I was being, what I felt at the time, sort of pushed aside. I knew I never wanted that to happen to anyone, especially in a senior environment. I mean, this is your job as a head coach, is to take care of the 20, 30, 40 so players, however many you have. It's not hard to make sure you're across every single player, if you're willing to put the work in. So I've known from a young age that coaching was always probably going to be my calling, not playing. Obviously it helps that I've played at a half decent level, and I've been around the world and experienced a lot of different things. But I knew from a young age that the coaching might be something that I could excel at. I've got fairly strong opinions about it, and the ACL. I actually tore my ACL during my last season, about 4 games in, and then played the rest of the season without my ACL.
Good Lord! And still scoring all those goals.
Still scoring, and I ended up getting Player of the Year this last year for during that season. So
that wasn't in the notes. Congratulations.
No,
it
it was it was an interesting time, to get the news that you've torn your ACL at 34 years old. You think, okay, well, that's me done. But then, you start running around the next day and everything's fine. There's no swelling. There's no pain. And then, you just sort of keep on playing. So it did catch up with me in the semifinal this last year. I landed funny and tore my meniscus, which was sort of the last straw. I'm actually having surgery in 2 weeks to finally get it fixed.
Oh, good luck.
So no, thanks. So yeah, and then that was it. I just finishing up my A license here. It's actually been delayed due to all this coronavirus stuff. So
right.
But I guess we're doing a bit better than you guys are over there. So
yeah,
we can't complain too much.
Right. Well, I know that you are coaching. So how did that transition happen? Did you move in with Brisbane Brisbane Olympic, or is it some other opportunity that's come up for you?
I started coaching through a connection at Brisbane Roar, which is at the A League level here, with their W League team, with their girls team, as an assistant. The girls league here is quite. I think it's probably one of the top 6 or 7 leagues in the world. The Australian women's team is obviously quite highly respected.
Of course.
And so it was something that always interests me, and having my daughter sort of really made me think about it. And through the football operations manager at Brisbane, he moved down to Melbourne City, which is obviously owned by the City Group. So you got your Manchester City, your New York City, and all that stuff. So
right.
He rang me up and said, we're hiring academy coaches. Would you like to put your name in? And I said, yeah, absolutely. And one thing led to another, and I got down here, and they needed an assistant for the W League team again. So I ended up doing that, and we were very successful this year. So now back working with the academy until the W League starts up again.
So what's your lots of people I talk to that want to be coaches, they have specific kinds of things they like to do. Do you like the academy? Do you like the young kids? Do you like the pro game? Do you see your future in the women or the men's? Where do you think you'd like to head with your coaching career?
I think I've got 2 kids at home, which is enough for me. So the academy side of things, I don't know if at the moment I'm working with sort of 15, 16-year-olds, which isn't too bad. You're getting towards that
almost adult
sort of, yeah. You're getting towards that sort of elite performance stage.
Yeah.
But the women's game is something I'm very, very interested in and committed to. I think it's women or girls, however you want to say it, they're very, very enjoyable to coach. They really listen and take on board instructions. Whereas sometimes you have 12-year-old kids who think they're
Pele,
the next Cristiano Ronaldo.
Oh, right, not Pele, right?
Whoever it is,
Yeah.
So and just this past year, for example, we've got girls on our squad that have played 105 times for Australia. Played in World Cups, and they're coming to me asking me for advice and what should I do in this situation and all this sort of stuff. So definitely for me, the women's game is something I'm very interested in staying in. But senior football coaching is I think is where I belong.
Well, I have to say, Alex, I find your career journey to be absolutely fascinating. I could listen to you tell stories about it for hours, but we're already well over an hour on this one. Looking back on your own career, any regrets, anything you feel like maybe I should have done that differently?
This is a question that I have wrestled with for a very, very long time. You think back to SMU. Should I have gone to England? Should I have not? Should I have just stayed? What would it have meant? Maybe a career in the MLS, maybe not. All sorts of what ifs. But then I think about my wife and my two kids, and maybe I never would have met them, and I wouldn't have got to experience other countries and other things. So regrets. I think regrets is a dangerous word in life in general, but more of a wonder. I think is the thing that I've kind of settled on is more just wonder what would have happened and how it would have happened, but comfortable in the way it did work out, and content with the career that I did manage to have, considering all the stuff that whatever happened to me.
You're one of the only people I know that's played in MLS and in Australia. So how do you think those two countries and their professional leagues compare from when you were in Major League Soccer? And I know you've probably seen enough Major League Soccer now that what do you think of where Major League Soccer is heading?
Well, people always say to me these days, when they talk about the MLS here, they say, "Oh, what a great league." And I said, "Well, it is now." And then I remind them about my first contract at FC Dallas. But the amount, from the outside at least, from the amount of investment that has gone into the game in the MLS is just it's staggering. I don't know if you've read anything about here in Australia, but we haven't played games in 2 or 3 months, and all of our players have been stood down. So that shows the difference in terms of financial viability or whatever you want to call it, between the two leagues. In terms of quality, I think there's more quality in the MLS. I think it's a league that allows more quality to prosper. The Australian A-League is one of the fastest leagues in the world. There were games when I was running 17, 18 Ks, which is I don't know if you want me to make me do the conversion rate, but
that's a lot. I know
it's a lot. It is so fast. You don't have that much time on the ball. It's just whereas there's a lot of Hispanic influence in the MLS, which is a bit of a slower game. There's a lot more, from what it looks like anyway. There's a lot more time and space to be creative, or a bit of flair, or whatever it is. But in terms of quality, there's some quality footballers playing in the Australian A-League. I was lucky enough to play against Del Piero of all people. So, it's struggling a bit at the moment, but hopefully we can get the league here back on track. And money's the only way that's going to happen, unfortunately.
Well, Alex, thank you for coming on and telling your story today. I think it's been absolutely fantastic. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It's, to me, the choices you've made have been both amazing, even if they were not what you would have picked ahead of time. To me, you have such a great story to tell and such a great trip you've made. I hope people enjoyed it as much as I did, and I can't thank you enough for coming on and talking with us.
No worries, Buzz. It was actually really good for me as well to sit down and talk. And after all these years, it's really good to talk to you. It's quite funny how it's all come in a roundabout.
Yeah, it's been a long time. I mean, I was out there watching you back in 05, 06, on the train and on the sidelines. And I'm glad you reached out last year and we were able to reconnect. And again, I appreciate you coming on. It's been tremendous.
Oh, thanks a lot. It's been a pleasure.
All right, everybody. That was today's Third Degree, the podcast with Alex Smith. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I thought that was thoroughly entertaining to hear those wonderful stories from some of the most amazing places Alex played. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can support us at thirddegree.net. Patreon.com/Third Degree. You can also, of course, read all of our work at thirddegree.net. Find us on Twitter and Facebook and everything else. Anyway, that's today's Third Degree, the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, and we will talk again soon.